The franchise tag feels powerful. Sometimes it feels like leverage. But in Dynasty salary cap leagues, most managers use it wrong. They tag the wrong players, they tag at the wrong time, and they tag to solve short-term fear instead of long-term strategy. On the Salary Cap Show, presented by Front Office Pros, we are breaking down why most Dynasty managers misuse the franchise tag and how to turn it into a competitive advantage instead of a cap trap. Just recently in the news, we have, the NFL season came to a close. The offseason is just beginning. And based on the timeline, we know that teams can begin to designate franchise tag players. And I think when it comes to Dynasty salary cap leagues and how the NFL uses franchise tags, I think there's sometimes a core misunderstanding. I think most managers treat the franchise tag as a safety net, almost as a way of not to lose value. I don't know if you've ever felt like this, Joe, but I feel like that's the way that we've been accustomed to think, because you watch your team and you're like, we can't, you see right now, and we know George Pickens is tagged. I'll use him as an example, right? He's talking about him being tagged. And it's like, we can't lose George Pickens, so we can't lose that value, so we're going to tag that player. I think oftentimes we think of it that way, and really the franchise tag is not a reward. It's really a leverage tool.
Yeah, it really is a leverage tool, and it's really just, as far as the NFL goes, it's really a leverage tool to be utilized for the owners, and that's why, honestly, players have in the past have gotten so angry at the franchise tag. Because it just doesn't provide any sort of long-term sustainability for the players. They're just stuck on that one-year short-term deal. And it's interesting because, as far as I've always kind of looked at it too, like from applying it in our salary cap contract dynasty league to the point where it's like that last resort safety net, as you were mentioning, like I don't want this guy to hit the market. I don't want to just lose him. So why not slap the franchise tag on him to be able to keep him? Yeah,
and I think, and there are different forms of the franchise tag. Obviously, you have the transition tag, which isn't a franchise tag, but it's a tag. And basically, for an NFL team, when they apply that, basically they can match whatever contract is offered in free agency. They're able to match that offer. They choose not to, then the player goes. They don't get any compensation from it. But in a franchise tag, you've got the non-exclusive and the exclusive tag. In the non-exclusive tag, you can sign a player. Again, the team is able to match. If they don't match, they get 2 first-round picks as compensation. But in the exclusive tag, they're taken off the whole free agency. They're out of free agency altogether. The team gets to keep them, no question about it, but they pay a higher premium for the player. But it is interesting, even when you think about tagging, and depending on how much you know about the topic, for those who are tuning in here, you can tag a player up to 3 years. After 3 years, they have to go in the market. But every year you tag them, it gets more and more expensive. It really does ratchet up over time.
Yeah, it does. And it's really, that's there just to try to disincentivize, using the franchise tag that many times. But that's why I think typically the only position you really see get franchise tagged multiple years is really quarterbacks. And that's largely due to the fact that, if you got a franchise quarterback and you're really not trying to pay him, a lot of times that, in the past anyways, think of like Kirk Cousins as he got the franchise tag the most. I think it was almost cheaper for the Redskins at the time to continually applying that tag to him versus trying to pay him market value for what the quarterbacks are currently getting. And right now the quarterback market has only gotten worse as years go on here.
Now, this is based off a Google search here. There's only been 2 players in NFL history, Joe, that have been tagged 3 times in their career. Do you know who they are?
No, not off the cuff. I don't know who they are. I don't know.
Offensive tackle Walter Jones and Orlando Pace.
Okay. Yeah, I
would never have gotten that.
No, those guys are before I was, I know Orlando Pace, watching him, but I was younger, but those guys are prior to me having the full understanding of how the inner works of these contracts work and all the different leverages that the NFL has to be able to retain players here.
Yeah, some more common ones that people may know about that have been tagged twice have been Kirk Cousins, Le'Veon Bell. That's when you saw Le'Veon Bell, eventually hold out. And then you had DeMarcus Lawrence and T. Higgins. But I think with T. Higgins, he didn't play on the tag the second time. They ended up signing him before he ended up playing on a second tag.
Yep. That is correct.
But when it comes to the franchise tag in general, and kind of transitioning from a dynasty salary cap perspective, we've come up with a few different, mentalities that people have when it comes to the franchise tag. And I think it's important to be aware of kind of your motivation with the tag. And the first one is tagging out of fear. Call it, the panic button tag. So you were just talking about that, Joe. Think about this scenario. Player's about to hit free agency. You don't want to lose them for nothing. You're looking at a contract extension. The contract extension is too cost prohibitive. You don't want to pay him that much money. And so automatically the team says, I gotta apply this tag.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like that is the most common way that people are viewing the tag and implementing it. Is just simply, like you said, out of the fear and hitting that panic button. Oh, I don't want to lose this guy. So just slap the tag on him and then I'll figure it out later. And it's just kind of a temporary placeholder holder in order to keep the player on your roster.
And I do think in some ways, sometimes I think someone would do that just as from a time perspective. Like, okay, because teams can decide to re-sign a player even if after they've received the franchise tag. There's a deadline on that. But could you say, like, let me see what happens here in the NFL before I go ahead and, depending on if your league has the ability to re-sign or extend players, maybe I want to see what happens at the draft before I go ahead and re-sign this player. So maybe you have a player that you really like who is a free agent, and then they go ahead and draft a player at the same position, and you're like, oh man, glad I waited.
Yeah, I really think that's why. But it's still, though, I feel like at that point, as you continue to let that guy get to being on the verge of free agency and that contract expiring, you're really setting yourself up to having to pay that guy market value. And I think that's why the smarter teams on players that they covet don't even let them get to that expired contract or the end of the deal. They got 2 years left, and you see, teams are putting up 4-year extensions or 3-year extensions and being able to retain that player a long time before it gets to that point, with the exception of the Dallas Cowboys. And that's why they continue to overpay everybody. They didn't learn their lesson for Micah Parsons. Now they're in a similar situation with George Pickens. They're going to franchise tag him. Rumor has it. Maybe they try to trade him for a second-round pick at the moment. But really, outside of the Cowboys, you really see that trend happening in the NFL.
Man, you absolutely trashed the Cowboys. You just dragged them through the mud.
Yeah, look, they're one of Jerry Jones, for as great as a businessman as he is absolutely terrible at managing the salary cap and managing all these players. I mean, he didn't learn those lessons with Dak Prescott. Then CeeDee Lamb comes up for a contract. They let him go and then overpay him to keep everybody. And then they're in such a bad spot they can't even, keep Micah Parsons. They got to move on from him. And then Jerry Jones is trying to pitch it. We're better off without him, but I do think they could potentially be better off him compared to having to pay him as much as the Green Bay Packers just did.
Well, and you and I have actually been talking about this a lot. I feel like we've been texting back and forth, but I feel like we've seen, and maybe it's always been this way, but it's just something that you and I are just more attuned to of late. More and more, we're seeing teams extend early, not waiting until the contract expires to come up with a new deal. I think we've seen it probably more so in the past 2 or 3 years. And I think we've seen it, for the time I've at least been following football.
Yeah, I don't think it's always been the case. I really think it has been a new trend over the past 2 to 3 years. And I really think that GMs have really smartened up in terms of how to manage their salary cap, and then being able to kind of get guys a little bit cheaper, and not having to have them wait, because they know every year that you wait, somebody's resetting the market at that position. So might as well, get it done earlier, get ahead of it and get it done sooner than later.
Well, and I think that's one of the things where it's a danger with kind of doing a panic button tag, because what's actually happening is you don't have any long-term control. There's no flexibility. And let's not forget, this is a massive 1-year cap hit that's fully guaranteed. So it's like, if you don't really know what your long-term plan is, you're tagging without a plan. And really, it's just kind of a form of expensive procrastination, honestly.
Yeah, it really is a form of an expensive procrastination. And yeah, that's why I think, honestly, you're better off if you are going to tag somebody. I feel like you're better off, like you said, almost buying that time to give yourself more additional time to, meet with the player and figure out how to get a long-term deal done. So then you actually have more of a long-term plan and you can better set up your cap for future years. Because like you said, otherwise if the player's playing on that tag, you got the fully guaranteed contract just for that year. And then who knows what's going to happen after that.
Another instance that we feel that dynasty managers misuse the franchise tag is tagging the wrong tier of player. You've got your good player versus your cornerstone player. a franchise tag is most valuable when it comes to elite positional difference makers, whether you're in a super flex league and quarterbacks and you don't want to necessarily spend, maybe their contract is too cost prohibitive. You want to, give them too much money, or maybe a cornerstone wide receiver, or even I think probably the best use is a player, in the prime age and in a competitive window. And if you're cap strapped, right, that's an opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to go one more year here. And I think I can push it. But I don't think I can sign this player long term. Even think about a player think if you had someone like Christian McCaffrey or a Derrick Henry, maybe you don't want to sign them to a long-term deal, but they're very productive. They're not in their prime, but are they a franchise player? Well, they're probably not going to be a cornerstone player for the next couple of years, but they're certainly better than a good player.
Yeah, no, I think I don't know if I ever really considered looking at it that way, but I think that would make sense, because you're not wrong. Like at this point, I wouldn't want a Christian McCaffrey, a Derrick Henry, these older running backs aging out that they have been able to perform, even though at their older age, especially at the running back position. Kind of never know when all of a sudden they're not going to be able to perform at this level. And do I really want these guys on a 3-year deal and something happens and you regret the other additional 2 years? So I think that would be a smart way to actually apply it, is kind of when you're uncertain about a player's future. And like you said, if you're just trying to prolong your window, maybe one more year, give it one last chance, it would make sense to kind of just franchise tag that player and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, because sometimes we hold on to players even though they're not cornerstone players. And sometimes we have our own bias, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, that player hit the market. Everybody would, want this player, so I can't let that happen. Well, what says that? And we would talk about this a little bit later, but it's like you don't really know what's going to happen. It's just that you're scared it's going to happen, so I'm going to franchise tag this good player. But maybe everybody else is like, I don't know, like, wow, I feel like I've had that reaction. I've seen people in our Dynasty Salary Cap League franchise tag player. I'm like, wow, they are way overpaying for that player, and they are thinking that the league wants them, and that's way over.
Yeah, I feel like you and I have been one of the few owners in the league that aren't necessarily afraid to let the guys kind of hit the market and kind of, see where they're at. I mean, I would rather let them hit the market, test the free agency, and see what the league mates think, like you said, and let them assign the value. And if it turns out the league values them more, maybe I'm not able to resign them, but I'd rather that than overvalue a player, keep them, and just pay him a lot more money just for me wanting to keep the player on my team.
I mean, I honestly don't think I can remember. I mean, we've been playing for over 6 years. I don't even remember if you've ever used a franchise tag.
I don't think I have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if well, no, I have, because I think I've tried to tag and trade. I think I actually successfully did. Now that I remember, I think I tag and trade Josh Jacobs. But
I think you're correct on that.
It's one of those things where it's like, I would want to be using it. I think the franchise tag, it can be very strategic, but it's also very situational.
Yeah, it is situational. But yeah, I mean, maybe I just haven't had players that I feel like have been worthy of the franchise tag. But I mean, I've been in a competitive window, but yeah, I haven't really ever felt the need to use a franchise tag myself.
So another way that dynasty managers misuse the franchise tag is ignoring the cap allocation. Otherwise, basically like a 1-year hammer. Because if you remember, the franchise tag is an average of the top 5 salaries at that position group over the past 2 years. So this is not a cheap dollar amount. And like we said, it's fully guaranteed. And it's immediate cap hit. So it's like, depending on what's going on with your cap situation, it really doesn't give you a lot of flexibility.
No, it certainly doesn't. And that could be a lot to do with why I have never had the franchise tag, just because typically when I was in that competitive window, I was pretty strapped for cash and right up against the cap to where I might not have been able to afford doing that.
Right. I mean, and that's probably why you didn't, because
that's
you
what I mean,
usually had to do some cap gymnastics in order to make it work.
Yeah, I've always had to more so let players hit the market, and even if I did like them, just because I couldn't afford to re-sign them or do an extension, and I had to do so much roster management and cap control.
And it depends, too, how much cap space you want to head into the season. Because if depending on what free agents or depending on how deep your roster is and you start having injuries or what have you, that's going to hurt your flexibility. If you have a cap hit, for, let's say a running back and it's like a $30 million cap hit, you're talking about possibly 10 to 15% of your cap being allocated to that one player. which I'm sure that player has a potential of being very, very good. But when you have a long-term deal, and we talked about this in our last episode, you can kind of structure the contract the way you want. You have different opportunities. You can restructure, you can extend. You can't do any of that with a franchise tag. It's just there, and that's the amount you got to pay. If I extend a player, I could extend them 3-4 years, and in year one, I could have that cap hit real low, and then progressively get higher, but have a way to get out of the contract, with low guaranteed and have an opt out, right? So, but with a franchise tag, you don't have that option. It's not like you can add void years to it or whatever. It's just that's the number, and you got to stay. It's like you go to a clothing store or whatever, and or probably not clothing. I'm trying to think, but anyways, you get a price tag. You can't move that price tag. It's there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's nothing you can do about it. And yeah, that's why I think that's why you've just really seen these GMs smarten up and do those extensions, give themselves the long-term flexibility and having a plan versus having kind of no plan and then waiting and then like, crap, this guy's about to hit the market unless we do something. And now that's something to keep the guy in, to maybe buy yourself time to have a long-term negotiation is that magic franchise tag.
Well, and you're alluding to our next point here, as far as misusing the tag, is using the tag instead of extensions, because you're really talking about short-term control versus long-term control. And we were mentioning this a little bit earlier in the episode here. Teams are often preferring the extension over tags because of, like what I was just talking about. You're having smooth cap hits where you can kind of, ease in to the cap hits and have ways to get out of it with exit ramps at the end. And you can actually, based off the timeline of your team, you have a better idea of what's going on. Whereas with a tag, managers tag because it feels safer, but you're not really committing.
No, you're not committing. It's literally just a 1-year safety net that you're able to retain the player and still have control over that player for an additional year. But like you said, I mean, like we've been saying, it is costly just because you gotta keep the player at that cost for the 1 year. I think that's why, if you're really trying to plan ahead, and if you're smart, you're always kind of trying to stay ahead of the game and really plan and situation, kind of keep your cap scheduled so then you kind of know what's going on. And by doing extensions, it really offers you that long-term flexibility to kind of look and see where you're going to be at.
Do you think there are certain positions or I guess maybe situations that you feel like make sense for the tag? I know I'm kind of speaking in as a generalization, but I just was curious of your thoughts as far as like, is there like, whether it's a quarterback position, the tight end position, or, we play, a full IDP, or, a defensive tackle, right? I mean, or a linebacker, right? We probably could have benefited from doing a linebacker franchise tag instead of signing guys like Devondre Campbell and Devin White, and you and I getting burned.
Yeah, you're probably not wrong about that. I mean, that's the thing. Extensions, well, I signed Devondre Campbell, went hog wild in free agency, and I've kind of learned not to go as aggressive in free agency like that. But yeah, you brought up the one example of aging running backs and maybe guys that you don't want to necessarily have on your team for future years, and you just want to ride it out one last time. I think probably makes sense. And maybe, it makes sense for, I could see maybe some of the, like you said, defensive tackle might be a good one just because these positions that aren't necessarily getting the top end contracts to where, that, like you said, it's the top 5% to where maybe the franchise tag makes sense because the market value is not necessarily as high and you can get the player on a cheaper franchise tag versus, quarterbacks in our league would be really expensive to do that. Even wide receivers and edge rushers, I feel like would be pretty expensive. Maybe wide receivers not as bad, but quarterbacks and edge rushers for sure.
Well, that's a good point too, because like you mentioned, it's the top 5 salaries for the position over the past 2 years. So that's why you see, even in the NFL, I've seen kickers get franchise tags because kickers don't get paid all that much. And so the teams can do a franchise tag for the kicker, and it's not that cost prohibitive. If a team decided to do a franchise tag for a quarterback, that franchise tag in the NFL is going to probably be like 40 to 50 million. Like that would be really hard to come up with. Obviously, it's been done, but when the Commanders did it with Kirk Cousins, they were like, is this guy the guy? Is he not the guy? They kind of had 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And I don't know if it really helped the Commanders either for a player like a quarterback position to kind of keep them in limbo with the franchise tag.
Yeah, no, and I mean, it really ruined any aspect of them being able to work out a long-term deal with Kirk Cousins just because they really made him upset by tagging him multiple times. But I think with that too is kind of unique because the quarterback market hadn't quite exploded the way it has now. So I think that's why I think more recently you're not really seeing quarterbacks get that franchise tag because it would be so expensive as the quarterback market has really gotten out of control here.
But it is interesting, though, in saying that because, and this is, again, kind of referencing a previous episode, we talked about this, we see more extensions, and even talking about guys like Tua and Kyler, but especially like Tua's case, they probably would have been better off franchise tagging Tua and then eventually letting him go if they weren't going to use him because now they extended him and now they're going to get hit with a monster dead cat.
Yeah, if they do what everyone is expecting and bite the bullet and get rid of them, you're definitely not wrong. But I think it's also a testament of, new regime coming in with new coach, new GM as well. They're not really tied to that player. So they might just be like, well, he's not our guy. Let's take the dead cap hit. We know we're kind of going in a rebuild phase and let's start fresh, with a rookie deal.
So this is our fifth most misused franchise tag application by Dynasty managers. But I think this one, honestly, might be the most important and the one I feel most strongly about, which is misreading your competitive window and tagging during a reset. Non-contending teams tagging players doesn't make sense to me. And I don't know why in our league, when you let a player go, you have the ability, depending on what you do in free agency, just like the NFL, you can get a compensatory pick out of it, which at the best, it could be a third-round pick. So people are like, well, I don't want to lose a player. This guy's good. Like, I'm not going to get any. How could I let this guy go and get nothing in return? But I think, like, what I don't understand is, like, well, play defense. And people don't understand when I say that, but it's like, okay, let's say you have, like, for example, Jacoby Myers in our league was a free agent, and he decided that, I know that the manager was on the fence whether or not to sign him, decided to let him hit the market, right? He went for crazy money in free agency, crazy money. So, you could say, well, hey, the manager, let him go, and now they got nothing out of it. Now, depending on what they did in free agency, I think they were pretty aggressive, so they're not going to probably get a nice comp pick for it. But if Jacoby Myers is a bust, you're talking about that other team now spending, like, having Jacoby Myers on their roster for like something like $25 million a year. So, like, there is a level of defense of, like, it's really like you're leaving bait. Like, you're leaving the carrot out there to be like, okay, take the bait and spend all this money for a player. And that's what happened in free agency. Now, we did see, interestingly, Seattle and New England made it to the Super Bowl, and I think they both were top 5 spenders in free agency this past season, off season. But we've seen before that and even in the NFL where these good to mediocre players hit the market, and every year we're scratching our heads saying, what? How did that player get so much money? And those teams are chasing the carrot, and they're stuck with the player, and it ends up burning them.
Yeah, it definitely does end up burning them. But I think the Patriots and the Seahawks, they were aggressive, but I think they spent in the right areas and really just kind of made their team stronger. They weren't necessarily just, throwing money at a top guy that it wasn't a very good player and wasn't going to help them. Where you see teams get in trouble is when you're paying, an average player kind of great money just because of the market and you got to steal them away from other teams. That's when you kind of get in trouble with overspending in free agency. We've seen plenty of bad teams get caught doing that in the past, but I think that is a good point. I mean, you do have to understand your competitive window and whether you're, rebuilding or going for it. And honestly, like if you kind of explained it to me too. And now that I'm in the rebuild mode, knew I wasn't going to go heavy in free agency, letting those guys walk, earning the compensatory pick. But if you're going to be going hog wild in free agency, maybe you do try to slap a franchise tag on that player, just knowing that if you do let them hit, even though somebody's going to overpay, at least, no matter what, you weren't going to get a comp pick or anything in return for the player.
Well, I just think for myself, even this past offseason, I went in, Chris Jones was a free agent in our league, the defensive tackle for the Chiefs. And I was surprised that the manager decided to let him hit the market because he's a big name. Probably if you asked any, NFL fan off the street, asked them, name me, top 5 defensive tackles that come to mind. He's probably in the top 5. Like, he has a huge amount of name recognition, and he has, he's done really well in sack production over the past few years. So he's a great player. And so I was like, I went for him. And now I'm paying top 5 money at the defensive tackle position. He's in the top 5 based on the money I'm paying for him. And he stunk last year. Absolutely stunk. I mean, I'm at a loss at what, and now I'm stuck with him with this. Now, hopefully he bounces back, but it didn't look pretty last year, and I don't have a lot of confidence heading into this year. Now, with IDP, things can swing pretty drastically, but it's not like he was injured. Like, there was this major injury that was hampering him. It looks like he may just be hitting the cliff, and the Chiefs might be hitting the cliff. But in that scenario, the other manager, they thought, like, you know what? There's enough of a chance, I think, that Chris Jones is starting to hit the cliff or he's going to regress. I'm going to let him hit the market. I can maybe decide. That's the thing. Just because you let someone test the market doesn't mean you can't re-sign them, and doesn't mean you can't re-sign them for cheaper. So it's like, to me, I don't understand why there's such a fear to letting players hit the market. And if you let a player hit the market, others people hit the market, and now it's a little bit richer at that position. Now you've got 3 or 4 guys, 5 guys that are really interesting at that position. Now it's not going to be like, oh, all 5 of these guys are going to go for a lot. Maybe 1 or 2 of them do, but it's like, unless it's scarce and you've got 1 guy or 2 guys, then you're seeing money go crazy money for these players.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's if more owners were willing to let their players, interesting players, hit the market, guys would go for a more reasonable price. But it just so happens that for the most part, I feel like not enough teams let these players hit the market, and then there's scarce situations and you just see these crazy deals. I mean, like you mentioned, Jacoby Myers getting that big money in our league. Wide receiver free agent market just wasn't there. So they were desperate to add a wide receiver on their team. We've seen Travis Kelce get a boatload of money. Teams bid in and out just because tight end can be a difference maker, especially with us being in tight end premium as well. It just kind of, it's the way it happens.
Well, it's like what they call it? The prisoner dilemma, where it's like, if we both, say that, I forgot what it is, but what is it? Like, we're both guilty and one person confesses or the other person confesses, or nobody confesses, right? Like, it's one of those things where if everybody kind of did it, then we would all benefit from it. But it's like, I'm not convinced that they're going to let their player hit the market, so I can't let mine.
Yeah, because I mean, that's the thing. If there's scarcity, then there's pretty much no chance you're going to be able to get your guy cheaper in free agency, because usually once your guy hits free agency, everyone knows that, he's going to get a lot of money. And I think that's the fear, is they know that people out there are willing to spend a lot of money in free agency, so they don't want that to happen. But in reality, if more people just joined on and the free agent pool grows, then there's a chance maybe somebody isn't as interested in your player just because there's other options to kind of pivot to.
I will tell you this right now, and I don't, doesn't mean that things won't change for me in the future, but I feel pretty adamant that I'm a big believer in this. I will never be scared to let a quote unquote good player hit the market. If I don't think it's fitting my timeline, if I think the player has a possibility to regress, if I think that it's an opportunity to play defense and allow somebody to take the bait, I'm going to lay the trap I'm going to lay the trap down and hope that they get stuck, because I think people can, especially in free agency, as you and I both know, in the worst way, you can get caught up in it and you end up paying more than you thought, and you're like, what did I just do?
Yeah. I've learned to be a lot smarter and a lot more strategic in free agency, and I got caught up.
We'll see. You got like over $200 million in cap space, so we'll see how smart you are heading into this next off season here.
Yeah, this will really be the test. I think this is probably the most money I've had to spend during the free agency period. So, and I'll also see what kind of players are available for me as well. But I just got so caught up in the free agent bidding process and felt like I always had to win and have like the top bid, and just was the complete wrong way to go about it.
So last reason here, why we believe most Dynasty managers misuse the franchise tag, is not leveraging the tag in trade strategy. It really is the forgotten weapon. Most managers just see the tag as, I'm retaining the player. I'm not even considering anything else. But it can be used strategically. If you tag an elite player, it could be a rental for contenders. Maybe you can, again, you don't, like we said, you don't really see any signs in trades, but you can see a tag in trade. We saw even with Devontae Adams, how he was tagged and traded from the Packers, and he went to the Raiders. So we have seen that even in the NFL, the idea of tags and trades, but it can be a bargaining chip. Now, I do think that it's a little overrated because it's like, okay, if I'm not convinced that you're going to keep him or sign him, why am I going to give you all this draft capital? I'm going to call your bluff, and I'm going to see you, not be able to keep this guy or make painful decisions, which means there are players that you have to either release or painful restructures in order to keep it. I'm typically like, I'm not one to say, I'm going to go trade for a player who's tagged because I'm going to call your bluff. But the other flip of the coin is, okay, I could be the one to say, okay, I'm going to call your bluff. But it only takes one other manager in the league to be like, oh yeah, I'll take him. I'll give you this. And then the trade goes down. It's one of those situations like, okay, no, don't let this person out of a jam. Like, they're stuck. They're stuck. They're coming to you being like, oh, well, I'll trade you a tagged player. And people decide to do it anyways.
Yeah, because I don't always, you look at things as from like a defensive perspective.
I do.
When you're trading and stuff, like I'm always looking at it from an offensive perspective. How am I going to make my team better? And if that's just the cost of doing business, so be it. I don't necessarily look at the impact of it's going to have on that team. I'm more focused on, hey, they've got a really talented player that I want, and they could really help my team, and I'm looking to compete. So, I'll give them the draft capital for that player, which is interesting that, everyone's got their own mindsets, but you always look at it from that defensive mechanism. I think, too, it's likely, I know there's rumors, like I said, Pickens gets tagged and trade, but I think this year there actually could be in the NFL room for that to happen just because the free agency market at wide receiver just isn't very good. And I feel like if teams really want to upgrade at wide receiver, they're going to have to make some trades.
Why would you, this is off topic a little bit, but if you're the Cowboys, why would you entertain the tag and trade with Pickens? That to me doesn't make a lot of sense. I understand, like, okay, if you're going to let the player go and you're not going to sign them, you're more likely going to get a third round comp pick. So if you get anything more than that in a trade, it's worth it. But why wouldn't you want to keep this guy?
I mean, I think partially, I just don't think the Cowboys are in a good position to be able to work out a long-term deal with Pickens and pay him. I mean, I think their cap situation is just not the best because they've had to overpay Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb to keep that together. They've got so many different holes on that roster. I feel like honestly it'd be advantageous for them to tag and trade Pickens and maybe not get somebody as talented as Pickens, but you can still find another complementary piece of CeeDee Lamb.
You think it's a Bengals 2.0 type of deal? They don't want to give the big money to Lamb and Pickens like the Bengals with Chase and Higgins and Burrow?
I mean, you see what happens, and then look, the Bengals defense actually absolutely sucks. I mean, I think the Cowboys see that, and we've talked all year how heading into this season, Dallas was literally the Bengals 2.0. So maybe they don't want to have that high paid trio on offense and then have their defense suffer. And they were able to acquire more picks and get some young players, which they really need.
At the end of the day, when you think about just the structural framework of when the tag is correct, I feel like it makes sense to use a tag when you're a legitimate contender. The player is, you feel that, we talked about they were maybe an elite type player, can't afford them, but you're in this championship window. You want to continue to extend that window. Maybe you have the cap to do it, right? Like, you talked about, if I don't have the cap, then I can't do it. But if you have an abundance of cap space, then you can do that. But you really have to come up with a follow-up plan and really project forward, because it really does take a lot of roster planning. I don't feel like you can fly by the seat of your pants in a dynasty salary cap. Like, you have to understand the opportunity cost of whether or not to keep a player, let the player hit the market, because it really is a chain effect.
Yeah, it really is a chain effect. And that's where I don't think at first when we started doing this, I realized what a chain effect it was, and just kind of going with the flow and just trying to focus on. I feel like I was trying to focus on my roster and the players on it versus focusing on the contracts and what it actually meant to my overall salary cap. And it's just like, I'll figure it out eventually.
Well, I think a lot of people do that, though. You're not the only one.
Yeah, I mean,
because people want to think. I mean, and it's not. I mean, you do figure it out. I mean, you could do all the planning in the world, but it doesn't mean that you can have a bad injury all of a sudden, and then your plan just got completely sidetracked.
yeah, but I mean, I think if you're truly planning, then you're able to build a team that has decent amount of depth as well to be able to withstand injuries, and that's a key thing to be able to do as well. But definitely have a, like we said, when we're doing extensions or signing players, we've learned to, try to have a plan and give ourselves an out if things change, so then we can pivot. We're not locked onto these players, and I think that's just, like we said, more so the chain effect that when we first were doing that, I was definitely not paying attention to that.
A franchise tag is not a safety blanket. It is a leverage mechanism tied to timing, cap allocation, and competitive windows. And once you understand that, the franchise tag stops being emotional and starts being strategic. If you enjoyed this episode, support the show by downloading it, following the Salary Cap Show, and leaving a 5-star review. It helps other Dynasty salary cap managers find the show, and we would greatly appreciate your support. Thanks for listening to the Salary Cap Show presented by Front Office Pros, and we will see you next time.